years ago, I guess, after a little book about the Global Fund for Women was published. And Julia didn't mention in the little bio that part of the background in philanthropy was founding the Global Fund for Women, which is an organization that raises money and gives away money to women's groups around the world. And I mention that because it's part of the story that leads up to the book, which I really would like to talk about. So I thank you very much for inviting me, and I'm happy to be back. And when one is introduced, I'm always reminded that when you've been around for 7 decades or something, you end up having done quite a bit. You just stay long enough, and you know the resume gets longer. So let me first of all say that I want to speak a little bit about the Global Fund for Women, because it was the background to this book in an odd sort of way. I ran this organization for the first 10 years of its life, almost 10 years of its life, and then I retired, planning to prune my roses and play with my grandchildren. And then I was given the opportunity, I was invited to teach at Stanford, because in the human biology program, there are many women who are very interested in women's issues, and men, some of them interested in women's issues, and many students interested in international work. And so I ran into someone from the human biology program, and he said, you really should be teaching at Stanford. We need people who'll be talking about women and international activities. So it came to pass that I met the director of the program, and he said, well, I'm delighted that you're going to be teaching. And I said, what do you have in mind? What am I going to teach? He said, anything you like, as long as it has to do with women and international affairs. So I said, okay, that's wonderful. How about a class on international women's health? Because that was part of my background. I was working in the field at that time as a consultant in that area. And that was marvelous. It fitted. Many of the human biology students are pre-med and going on into public health or medical school, or possibly law with the human rights interest. And so I was delighted to begin to think about teaching a class on women's health, international women's health. And so then I sat down. It was set for the winter of 2001 or something, and I sat down and I thought, what am I going to talk about? What issues will I raise? What comes to mind when we think of international women's health? I'm asking. What comes to mind when you think of international AIDS?
Birth control.
Birth control.
Abortion.
Abortion.
How many children die?
Yeah. Infant mortality. Infant mortality.
Lack of care.
Say it again.
Lack of health care.
Lack of health care, lack of access, that sort of thing. Other ideas? What else do we think of when we think of international women's health?
Abuse, lack of skills.
Say it again.
Unemployment, abuse.
Abuse.
Lack of skills, unemployment.
Lack of skills, employment. Now we're getting to some of them. Yeah. Okay. I prefer not to use the word abuse. I use violence, actually.
Okay.
But I'll tell you about why that is later. Any other thoughts?
Female circumcision.
Female circumcision. Other things, sometimes known as female genital mutilation. Some people have heard of it, and perhaps, and maybe not, will mention it as passing. So as I began to put together the course, I thought, breast cancer, ovarian cancer, maternal issues, child issues, some of these other violence, various things. What will I look at in this class? What will I teach in this class? And I decided, and the reason I mentioned the Global Fund for Women, I decided to go back to the Global Fund for Women, to the files of the Global Fund for Women. I had all the early board books, and I had seen many of the proposals from hundreds of women's groups around the world, and I decided to go back and just pore over them and find out, what did women want to do about which issues? What were the issues? And I went back and I started just writing those issues down. And I created the course around the issues that came up most often with women around the world, all different countries. What were they writing about? They were putting together a group in their village or in their town to deal with the issue of domestic violence. They were putting together a group to deal with the issue of needing money, needing cash, working. They were concerned about trafficking in women across borders and within countries. All of these issues began to emerge, and I had my long list. And then I thought, right, I know which ones I'm going to look at, and I tried to define the issues in terms of critical issues. Those, I call them critical issues in international women's health. Those issues that mean life or death to women, depending on whether or not they can exercise their human rights. So I began to give a kind of human rights lens to this class and try to think, how can I develop these, what organization can I use? You just don't want to go from one issue to another. What organization can I use? And so in my class, I came up with the idea that I would look at women from infancy, or even before birth, infancy through old age. And that's how the course developed. And I began with an introduction on human rights and why one might focus on women, and we can talk about that if you like. As I went through my course, we then moved to infancy, where we talked about, we don't have anything to write on, otherwise I would have happily done it. I should have brought a PowerPoint maybe, but we began in infancy, that is, or even before birth, with son preference, the issue of son preference, the issue of female infanticide, sex-selective abortion as well. Then we moved to infancy and childhood, and the question of access to education, a terribly important issue that women were constantly highlighting. What else under childhood? Female genital mutilation was one of those issues that women were writing about and working on in their groups. And another issue was child labor. So I included that under childhood. Then I moved to adolescence. What were the issues they were writing about? They were writing about early marriage and early childbirth. Really a dangerous time for young girls married too young or engaging in sex too young, but generally married too young, and giving birth under the age of about 17, which is where the body is not quite ready for it. And so early marriage and early childbirth sort of was located in adolescence. And the third issue that I included under adolescence was another issue that women were gathering around, organizing groups to address, and that is the issue of HIV/AIDS. HIV, the fastest growing group contracting HIV right now in the world, in all countries, is young women between the ages of about 13 and 20. So it's not the most people that have been affected by AIDS, but it's the fastest growing group right now. And that happens for a lot of reasons. We could come back to some of this, but women are biologically more vulnerable to contracting AIDS, and most of us would know this, than are men in a single sexual encounter. But younger women are particularly vulnerable because they can't negotiate easily, negotiate safe sex easily, and they are biologically more prone to getting AIDS in a single encounter. So, in fact, some people estimate between about 3 and 7 times as likely to contract HIV in a single encounter than are men. So adolescents looked at early marriage, early childbirth, and HIV. Then I move up to womanhood, where I was taking up immediately the general issue of reproductive health, following on from the earlier discussion. And in this time, under this sort of womanhood, which covers a number of issues, we look particularly, in my class, at reproductive health, and especially at maternal mortality. There are people in this room who know more about this than I do, but maternal mortality is yet another of the outrages that I ultimately talk about when I got around to writing the book. 600,000 women a year, maybe people know these statistics, but 600,000 women a year, almost all in poor countries, die from almost completely preventable childbirth and pregnancy-related illnesses and injuries. It's just, one might not call it an epidemic, we'll get to that later, but it's total outrage. I mean, these are women who are living their lives preserving the species, basically, and not living their lives in these 600,000 cases. It's really, I think, an absolute scandal that we haven't been able to deal with the question of maternal mortality. Those figures really haven't changed in 20 years. And, it's about the same number. The percentages are down a little given population growth, but about the same number, 500,000 to 600,000 a year, has been the figure that we have used for the past 20 years. And the statistics on this are really pretty good. They're pretty good, unlike some other statistics for other issues. So here we are looking at maternal mortality, access to safe abortion, various maternal issues. And then I move to the next topic under womanhood, where we look at violence.